My name is Karen Jumonville, and I'm the Director of Growth Management Department, and I'm joined tonight by Bill Pavley and John Reddick of my team. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. We know that you're busy and have many demands on your time, so we truly appreciate that you're willing to partner with us in the creation of the Glitch Ordinance. In case we have any new participants for tonight's meeting, let me provide some quick background. Staff is working on an ordinance that's meant to fine-tune our existing zoning code. We've been referring to it as the Glitch Ordinance, and it has three goals. First, we want to identify parts of the code that aren't working as intended and propose ways to fix it. Zoning codes are living documents that are meant to evolve over time to reflect the community's priorities. And it's also important to recognize that time has taught us what parts of the code are and aren't working as originally planned. So that's what we're doing with the Glitch Ordinance. It's an effort to fine-tune the code to make it work better. Second, we also kept a laser focus on the intent of what the code is trying to achieve. Ensuring that the desired outcome is achieved is an absolute.
No feet, Pippin.
But there's typically more than one way of achieving an outcome. Where that made sense, we worked to build multiple paths to achieve the same result. Third and finally, fixing the code and adding common sense flexibility should also serve to reduce the number of future variance requests. So, however, the first goal was always to fix the code where we identified a need. If that reduces future variances, that's a good secondary benefit, but it wasn't what guided our decisions. So we started this process with a community meeting on August 16th. Staff provided an overview of the entire ordinance at that meeting. And the community asked us to schedule follow-up meetings to give the public an opportunity to discuss each section of the ordinance in more detail. So tonight's meeting will focus on the compensating enhancements section of the ordinance. And we have additional meetings that are scheduled for September 20th and October 4th to discuss the remaining sections of the ordinance. So with that, we'll start with a quick 5-minute presentation from Bill and John, but then we'll turn the meeting over to you to get public input. So thank you again for joining us.
And thank you so much, Karen. You should be able to see the city's website on screen right now. I'd like to just very briefly, in about 60 seconds or less, let everybody know that if they go to the growth management website, as I'm doing right now, and go down to this blue bar that says Glitch Ordinance, that will take you to the project website. We have tried to use this as sort of the home base for answering various questions that were asked of us at the last meeting. You'll notice that we have a video of the August meeting that you can watch there. Links to all of the future meetings are shown here. Oh, I'm sorry, everybody. Let me check to see why this isn't sharing.
There it goes, Bill.
Okay, thanks so much. Sorry, everyone. I need to back up just a bit. John, did you say that it's sharing now?
Yeah, or it's sharing your screen, but it's currently on the presentation.
Right. I'm going to jump over to the website right now.
Gotcha.
Bear with me. Okay, let me try that again. If you go to the city's website, go over to services on the right-hand side, and then to growth management, and then down to the blue bar that says Glitch Ordinance. That takes you to the project website. And this is, as I said, sort of the home base for where we are keeping all the information related to this project. This first bar provides videos of all of the meetings. That's last month's meeting. We'll also post a link to tonight's meeting tomorrow. This gives you links for joining all of the future meetings that we have scheduled. There's the draft ordinance at that link. And then here you'll find specific answers to all of the questions that were posed last month. I think we have posted answers to nearly everything at this point. For example, there was a request for a map of sites for the multi-building option. That's at this link. And as you run through this, you'll see that there's information provided on a pretty wide range of questions that were posed to us 30 days ago. There are still one or two things that we're fine-tuning, and we think probably in about a week or 10 days, we'll likely have 100% of everything answered. But again, you'll find that at the city's website, the project page for the Glitch Ordinance. And John, I'm going to put up the PowerPoint slides and I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Bill. So I'll give a quick run through, just sort of a repeat of what we've went through in the initial meeting of what the compensating enhancements entailed. And one thing I'll point out is our attempt here is to have very specific, measurable standards that we're working with in these. So there's no room for open interpretation of what's good, bad, or otherwise. So one thing we're working on is building in some alternatives for our building setback standards, recognizing that the overall intent of what we want to achieve in the area between the building facade and the street can be accomplished with a range of site design details and streetscaping. And so to understand that if the building can shift, say push further back away from the street, then if other design features are enhanced, hence the term compensating enhancements, then we think we can still achieve the same outcome of what we want to see there along that streetscape and along that building frontage. So here, what we're looking at is a very strict standard of each 1 foot, increase in that front yard setback. Then you do one of the compensating enhancements listed. And within the actual draft of the ordinance, if you review it, each one of those enhancements have very specific extents to which they have to be provided in order to meet that standard. So, with each you have whether it's specific size, percentage, or otherwise. The other item, I'll follow you, Bill. Sorry. The other item is sidewalks and looking at some opportunities and unique scenarios for flexibility to how the sidewalk width is provided, but understanding again that there can be improvements elsewhere in those frontages, even with a narrower sidewalk, where we can still get a better outcome or get the outcome that we want to see. One thing I will point out is that while you do have these compensating enhancements that you provide in exchange for, or maybe a reduction in for each foot reduction in the sidewalk width, in every case, the expectation is that you are also going to widen that planter area by a foot. So for each foot reduced in the sidewalk width, you would be increasing the planter width by a foot, and you would be doing one of those compensating enhancements in addition to that. Let's see what our third one is here. Our third is street trees. And this is one recognizing some scenarios where whether for a number of reasons, the preferred tree placement can't always be achieved on the site. And so relative to where the sidewalk is. And so this is building in some standards again to say, if it's understood that it's, the preferred alternative is to place the tree elsewhere, rather than between the back of curb and the sidewalk, and that, that preferred planting strip between the sidewalk and the curb, then looking at other locations on the site would also require that you provide some additional enhancements to, again, make sure that we're still able to achieve the frontages that we want to see in these projects.
And John, if I may, I'll just throw into the discussion as well that the code since the very, very beginning has always been very flexible about permitting the street trees to be planted between the sidewalk and the building or elsewhere on site if there are utility constraints or any number of other reasons that would justify that. So this isn't adding any new flexibility concerning the location of trees. That flexibility has always been in the code. This is just simply saying that if you do that, that's such an important issue that there needs to be a compensation to assist that pedestrian frontage to make it what it's intended to be.
No, thanks, Bill. That's good. And then the fourth and final that I'll touch on is transparency. And what this is looking at, this really comes from a recognition that some uses may not be appropriate to have the levels of transparency along their frontages that we would otherwise require. So the example shown here is the Greenwise Publix on Gain Street. And this was an example of them having a large portion of their building that was set aside for their freezer and storage, grocery storage. So what they did instead, recognizing you're not going to have transparency into their cooler area, is they took the liberty of putting in added landscaping, outdoor seating, and some other facade articulation to try to make sure that that maintained a good, active, attractive frontage across the entirety of that building frontage. And so we even referencing some specific, design improvements that they did. We built in the opportunity for, again, to allow projects to reduce some of their transparency requirement in exchange for providing these other features along the frontage that can really improve that public frontage there.
Okay. Thank you so much, John. So, the purpose for this meeting tonight is to really just sort of turn it over to the community and give the community ample time to ask us questions, make suggestions, give us your feedback, give us guidance. So we really didn't have any other formal presentation planned. We were really just hoping to hear from everyone. But for lack of a better way of dividing up the three community meetings, we were proposing that compensating enhancements be the first topic. So would anyone like to jump in?
Well, I just posted a message in the chat. This is Martha Williams. I'm a little confused. It seems like providing a larger setback triggers punitive action on the developer. And wouldn't a developer prefer to build right up to the property line? And if they provide wider frontage, wouldn't that be good for the public and not the developer?
Well, John, feel free to chime into this as well. Ms. Williams, I think the principle is that most zoning codes for urban areas would sort of craft the code so that that public pedestrian space isn't overly wide. If it's like a big wide canyon of space, you lose some of the intimacy of the pedestrian space. So I think the idea is that our code right now has a setback whose intent is to bring the buildings closer to the street, to increase interactivity, to increase the ability to window shop, to increase the eyes on the street, for better safety. What we're saying is that setbacks operating by themselves, or transparency by themselves, or any of these other development standards that we have in our code, it's not each of these standards individually, it's all of them working together. So if the setback were to be dialed back a bit so that it was made larger, the public space could be preserved by increasing one of these other standards. So that's the principle. If the setbacks get too wide, spaces become less walkable because there's less for lack of a better word, there's less, sort of intimacy of the space. It just gets too wide.
Right. So basically, you're saying if they want it wider, they've got to enhance that space. Basically.
Absolutely. And I'll give you a great example. If you're walking down a street and the space from building to building, if it grows wider, that's not a bad thing if the extra width is occupied, say, for example, by outdoor seating from a cafe, or maybe a little plaza that has a fountain. I'm thinking of if anybody is familiar with Park Avenue down in Winter Park, the outdoor walking space really varies a great deal on Park Avenue. And that's due to a lot of courtyards, a lot of fountains, a lot of public spaces. But the outdoor space is still made very active and very vibrant because while there might be some additional width for any number of reasons, it's done deliberately to enhance the public space and not sort of turn it into suburbia. I'm sorry, ma'am, you may be muted.
Yeah, I am. Since I yelled at my dog once while I was unmuted, I've decided to mute myself whenever I'm not speaking.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't want to know about her chewing on her feet. So I have, I'm all in favor of modulating the setbacks and enhancing the setbacks. There are a couple of things that we've talked about that I really think that the buildings need more overhangs to cover the sidewalks to protect people from sun and rain. I think that ought to be a given in Florida, and not just a little eyebrow of something that looks like it might be an overhang but really isn't. So I don't know about the building setbacks and how that would affect that. But anyway, I just wanted to get that out there.
No, no, ma'am. I think that's a good comment. And in fact, one of the compensating enhancements is sidewalk coverings. You made me think of something that I think we ought to really probably tweak in the code. One of the compensating enhancements is sidewalk coverings. It specifically calls out awnings, canopies, arcades, colonnades, or verandas, and they're required to cover 75% of the building frontage. Your comment makes me realize that I think we probably ought to consider having a minimum width, for that to really make sense. So we got the length part right, but I neglected to consider the width. So I'm making a note of that right now. Randy, did I see you raising your hand?
You did. Can you hear me?
It's good to see you. I hope you had a good trip out west.
We did. Just got back. I'm a little, I guess not jet lag, car lag. I have some real concerns about this. I just want to go over the history of kind of where I feel like we are. We approached all this like 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. I don't even remember anymore, because our concern was that the deviations were basically variances, but with another name, and that they weren't meeting the requirements that the law required them to meet, and mainly hardship and some other hoops that you have to jump through legally to get a variance. And so we started down this road together to try to figure out how to do something about that, and we all agreed that maybe the deviations need to go, and we needed to just have one variance statute, which met variance ordinance rather, that met the legal requirements for variances. But what I see in this glitch statute, and I'm not sure it's a glitch statute, is that it's almost all the same things that people were allowed to do under the deviations, such as change the setbacks, change the footprint of the building, change the height, change the landscaping, change the transparency. Those were all the things that they were allowed to do under the deviation ordinance. Only now, instead of applying for those and having those reviewed and processed, and maybe they'd get them granted or maybe they wouldn't get the deviation granted, now it's automatic. And that concerns me greatly because I feel like what is going to happen, developers are going to want to maximize their profits, obviously, and they're going to figure out which are the configurations that are the most profitable, and then they're all going to want to do that. And so instead of having an ordinance that creates predictability as to what people in the community can expect to be there, there's going to be no predictability at all. Or that we'll end up with a de facto ordinance where everybody will do the same thing, but none of it will meet the underlying code, zoning code requirements. So that concerns me greatly because I've heard a couple of times in the presentation, you know, what we want this to look like, you know, what we hope for, and I don't understand what that language is. Honestly, I don't know what the vision is here. What do we want it to look like? Because my sense of zoning codes is that they are supposed to inform developers what they can and can't do, and they're supposed to inform the public what to expect the area will look like when it's built out. And I feel like this I mean, you call it flexibility, I call it unpredictability, because you know, if I live next door to something and they might be allowed to save a tree and get 2 more floors, extra height can really change the ambience of a neighborhood. And how do you know, as a person living there?
Randy, I'm gonna jump in.
Okay, go ahead.
Forgive me. You've asked a series of questions, and I want to hear every single question that you want to ask.
Okay.
But I'd like to have a chance to try to answer some of them as we go along. Let me tackle the very last thing that you said. The part of the proposed code that would allow an extra floor in return for saving trees, if you read that, it specifically prohibits that option if a commercial site is next to a residential neighborhood. So I think with great respect towards you, that's not accurately representing the proposal. That is prohibited if next to residential. That would only be commercial next to commercial. But let me talk for a second, if I could, about the big picture point that you're making about flexibility. And you know I respect you, so I'm not meaning any disrespect in what I'm about to say.
Well, the respect is mutual, but I think we have a difference in philosophy. But go right ahead. I'm listening.
Well, Randy, what I was going to share is I've worked as a city planner for about 35 years for 3 different cities. I'm like everybody else. I can only speak from my own personal experience in the various cities that I've worked for. That's both in Florida and California. My experience is that zoning codes absolutely should provide direction and guidance for development, but if they're to function effectively, it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all, everything looks the same, everything is cut from the same mold. If you do that, it creates a host of problems. My experience in other cities like Orlando and Sacramento is that this sort of intentional flexibility is built into the code, not for a nanosecond to reduce the standard, but to recognize that each site is different, and that what really matters is the outcome. You know, what's the principle that we're looking for? You know, and you know, just as one example, one principle that I think we would all agree with is an effective, attractive, interesting, safe pedestrian space. Okay. An attractive, effective pedestrian space isn't created by rigid adherence to one sidewalk width. It's through a combination of a lot of things working at the same time, like sidewalk width and street trees and transparency and architecture and outdoor seating. And if a code slavishly sort of hitches itself to just one numeric standard, it's missing the boat in my professional opinion. I think the important thing is to recognize that there are multiple pathways typically to get to a desired public good, like a good pedestrian space. And for the code to really do its job the way I think it's meant to, it needs to recognize that there can be multiple paths instead of one rigid, one size fits all off the shelf solution. So that's really what we're trying to do. And believe me, as the planner who worked with a number of neighborhood groups for about a year and a half on the neighborhood compatibility ordinance, bright and shiny on my radar was the idea that this glitch ordinance would be respectful of what had been achieved through the neighborhood compatibility ordinance. And if you read all of the glitch ordinance, it specifically says, for example, in the compensating enhancement section, that in the event of any conflict between the glitch ordinance and the neighborhood compatibility ordinance, that the neighborhood compatibility ordinance will control. So that's a principle that is near and dear to our hearts. And that, I think we've crafted this to strictly protect neighborhoods, but to build in common sense flexibility when in fact it does make sense. So thank you for listening to me. I'm gonna shush now.
Well, it's interesting you raised the issue about the sidewalk width. That's one of the things that I think I'm the most concerned about, because it's tremendously frustrating, for instance, to try to walk in Midtown because the sidewalk is so narrow. And we know, as you know, I'm not a planner, but I've read enough and enough as a planner that wide sidewalks encourage people to go out in groups and stroll. And that's why the sidewalks along Franklin Boulevard and Cascade Park are so utilized, where they never were before they became wide sidewalks. And suddenly people are out there at all hours of the day and night because the width of the sidewalk is very appealing. I can't even explain what it is. I just, like Potter Stewart said about pornography, I know it when I see it. And when it feels attractive and feels safe and people go out and walk. And narrowing those sidewalks is really concerning to me.
Okay, let me jump in real quick on that point if I could.
Widen it, but not narrow them, for God's sakes.
Hey, could I say something real quick, Randy?
Sure.
I think for everybody's knowledge, the proposed compensating enhancements would only allow up to a 2-foot reduction of a sidewalk. But if that 2-foot reduction of the sidewalk happens, then the planting strip next to the sidewalk would have to be increased by 2 feet.
I saw that, but that's, people don't walk in the planting strip,
Right, but what we're talking about is the difference between a 10-foot sidewalk versus an 8-foot sidewalk for a new development. I'm speaking now just from my own personal opinion and what I've seen in other cities from prior jobs. From my personal sense of what looks good, I actually think that Tallahassee probably builds not too many sidewalks, but sidewalks of an excessive width in some cases. I think there are times when the aesthetic of the sidewalk is diminished by doing too much concrete and not enough planting strip. So, again, all that this is doing is allowing the potential reduction of the sidewalk width by 2 feet if the width of the planter increased by 2 feet and went to a tree species that at maturity would actually cover that expanded area.
But if we want a wide sidewalk and a planted area, because we all agree that this is a good community aesthetic, why not just say that in the code? You see, this is my problem.
Well, but
people to get reductions for doing things we want. If we want those things, why not just mandate them?
Well, the multimodal transportation district right now says that an arterial roadway anywhere in the city has to have a 10-foot sidewalk. It says that a collector has to have a 6-foot sidewalk, and all other, no, I'm sorry, 8-foot sidewalk, and all other roads are less than that. What this is trying to do is to acknowledge that all corridors are not made equally. Walkability on Gain Street is wildly successful because Gain Street was redesigned, traffic calming measures were introduced, and the lanes were narrowed. I mean, to me as a planner, and my job in this process is just to put ideas out there on the table for community conversation. I mean, a core value for me is that it is not my job to tell the community what it should want. I'm a generator of ideas. What I would, the argument that I would throw out there for conversation is that all roads are not made the same, all corridors are not the same. And while a 10-foot sidewalk is brilliantly successful on West Gaines or on Gain Street, it arguably doesn't make sense on West Tennessee or on extreme north or extreme south Monroe, where the travel speeds might be 45, 50 miles an hour, and the actual speeds might be way more than that.
I disagree with you, Bill, but what my point is if that's what you want on any particular street, build it into your code. I mean, I'm personally offended by the concept in this glitch ordinance that if a developer saves a protected tree or a so-called protected tree, that then he gets compensation. If I were writing the code, I would say you protect this tree, period. And if you don't, you're and here's your compensation. You don't get a fine for just that's I don't see how you get compensation for doing what is in the best interest of the community. I think you just put that into your code.
Well, and that might be a point where we need to respectfully disagree with each other. For the group, what I would say is that what Randy's referring to is there is a provision that if there is a major tree on a site, and if the developer could otherwise build on that property under the existing code, we want to incentivize them to preserve that tree. And the only incentive that is being offered is that if you take the footprint of the critical protection zone of the tree, which the tree needs to live, and if that is put in a conservation easement so that it's protected forever, the developer could have the potential of another floor, but the square footage would be limited to the trees area times the height that they could build to in that zone. So it's essentially a one-for-one swap. And, Randy, I respect that maybe you don't care for that option, but that is something that's used quite commonly in other communities, just as a means to incentivize tree protection.
I feel like if you buy a piece of property and it has a protected tree on it, you've bought it with that knowledge, and then you protect that tree and you build your design around that.
Well,
this is completely, not to be vulgar, but ass backwards, where you're getting some kind of credit for protecting a tree that you knew when you bought the property was protected. So I find that to be offensive, because these are community treasures, these trees.
well,
And we should be protecting them as a matter of course.
okay, well, the content of the tree ordinance, Ms. Williams, I'll get to you in half a second. Thank you so much. I see your hand.
I'll let other people talk. I have other things I want to say, but let other people talk.
Okay, Ms. Williams?
Excuse me, I've had my hand up for quite a while.
Oh, forgive me.
This is
I
Becky.
can't, Ms. McGuire, forgive me. I didn't see your hand. I apologize.
Yeah, actually, I'll claim it. The little hand was disguised by the wood paneling in the background. I apologize. I didn't see it either.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry. From my view, I just see my ceiling, but you're right. We've got a lot of wood paneling here. Excuse me, Ms. Williams. I just wanted to address a couple points that have come up. I think we all agree. First of all, I was one of the people that asked if we could sit down and brainstorm like this, and I appreciate that you're doing it tonight. So thank you. And I hear you saying that, you know, our effort is to reach our vision in the best way and provide flexibility so that we can be innovative about it. But kind of consistent with what Randy's saying, I feel like the vision isn't clear when we say, I mean, theoretically, we care about transparency, trees, setback, sidewalk, but they're negotiable in this path forward. They're not standards really anymore because you can trade them off. And so that, you know, I don't agree that in the past everything was bad and it's only these new standards that can give us flexibility. Most of us enjoy going to small towns around Tallahassee where the downtowns, everyone considers them charming. You know, we like to be there. They didn't result in terrible things from my perspective. Not that I want to go back to the early 1900s or something like that. But, you know, one of the reasons that ATN came forward and was encouraging the another look at variations and deviations, variances and deviations, was because it was feeling like it wasn't balanced, that the development community's concerns or ideas were to be taken into account more than the rest of the regular citizens in the neighborhoods. And my concern is that that perception will be even worse here because you've got a land use administrator making decisions in gray areas. It isn't clear really what's right and what the standard is. And
Could I ask a
so
favor?
that's my comment.
Okay, no, I appreciate that very much. I would like to make a suggestion though. I think to say that the new code is kind of creating an environment where the standards are negotiable, I would respectfully disagree with that. I think what we've set out there, you know, I understand if someone dislikes something from a policy standpoint. I can respect that, but it's not a negotiable sort of environment. It's very if this, then this. You know what I mean? That
Yes,
is.
but can we trade trees for if you paint your building 3 colors? I mean,
Oh, we're not proposing that, ma'am. What I think you're referring to is that if a project, because of maybe right-of-way constraints, you know, say for example, if the road is on DOT right-of-way and DOT might not allow, you know, they might just literally not allow the trees to be between the back of the curb and the sidewalk, that may push the trees to between the sidewalk and the face of the building. It just sort of shifts them over. So it's not changing the presence of the trees. It's just changing the location of the trees.
but
That
excuse
that
me, but doesn't it say that you need to provide 3 of the enhancements and they can be architectural, or am I misunderstanding that?
you're misunderstanding one point. What it's saying is that if the applicant has to move the trees to a different location on the site, which is almost always just shifting them to between the sidewalk and the building, then they have to do 3 of the enhancements. That flexibility to move the trees from that planter strip between the curb and the sidewalk to over to between the sidewalk and the building, that provision has always been in the code. So what we're proposing is in fact more restrictive because, you know, we're saying that if you don't put the trees in that preferred location, like the code presently allows, then you have to do 3 of these other things. The trees will still be there. Nothing whatsoever is changing with that. It's just saying that making that shift of location is important to us, and we think that an applicant should have to up their game, so to speak, by doing some of those other design features, things like publicly accessible space, raised planters, functional porches, height step backs. There's about 15 of them.
I know, but as I say, I think they're variable value compared to these core values that we're suggesting can be mitigated through these enhancements.
And
Okay.
I think that's a good comment, because that is something that we've internally worked through when we were drafting it initially, is to make sure our intent is for the compensating enhancements to be things that collectively contribute to that frontage. And for example, in that case, we decided to put architectural enhancements that you're referring to in there related to tree placement. And so I think it's a perfectly valid comment to question whether that's an appropriate enhancement, thing that we're going to improve, to try to keep that as a good, I guess collectively good frontage that we want to see. So I think it's a point taken for us to consider that, versus other things that may be a better priority in that case, to make up for what we're not able to get by having the trees between the sidewalk and the curb. And so that's the exact, I think, kind of comment that I'd be looking for there is maybe some commentary if you think there are other things that should be considered in those cases, to improve the project. So yeah, no, I think that reflects accurately our own questioning we've had internally.
But just so that everyone's clear, because this I think is a tremendously important point for us. The proposed ordinance does absolutely nothing in terms of the quantity, size, or placement of the trees. What's in the code today will remain in the code. The only thing it does with regard to trees is that if the developer opts to use the text that's in the zoning code right now, they have to add more to that pedestrian space to make it better. Nothing is being reduced with regard to the tree plantings. Randy or Ms. Turner?
Go ahead, Marcia.
I think Miss Williams was next.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Forgive me, Ms. Williams.
Well, it could be that I've already spoken and, other people haven't. I have about 3 things to say. One of Randy's points was that if a developer buys a property and it's got a big tree on it, they know it's got a big tree on it. Lately, it seems to me that they don't care and they just demolish the tree. And then they say, oops, I demolished a tree. I hate that. But I wondered if maybe giving them more incentive to save the tree might help, or requiring them to save the tree. That's what I would really like. The other points I had was I put one in the comments. When a project comes in for review, can't the planners steer the developer towards the enhancements that are suitable for that location?
Sure, I'll chime in on that one, Bill. Certainly in occasions, I'm not gonna say we do it because it's not an active code yet, but if that did come in, I could see where we would be working with them to consider preferred alternatives. But I think our ultimate goal is sort of what I was saying to Ms. McGuire there is I think our ultimate goal would be to have something where the collective options would be appropriate in any case, if that makes sense, so that it doesn't leave it up to a staff preference of something.
Right, but
so
you probably have some intuition sometimes where things aren't appropriate that you could steer them away from.
sure. So I think the only thing I could say at this point is we would want to have basically standards that would not put us in a situation of having an enhancement that we'd want to avoid. But we certainly don't have it written where staff gets to choose what they want. But it is common to provide direction of what a preferred alternative would be.
And if I could chime in as well, I think that's a really important point. John covered four areas, sidewalks, street trees, transparency, and there was a fourth that I forget. But when the list of compensating enhancements, we did try to tailor those to sort of match the thing that they were compensating for. So, for example, if someone had a reason, let's say they're a grocery store and they have huge, cooler chests on the wall that faces the street. So, it's not practical for a grocery store to have loads and loads of windows. Um, we did try very hard to make sure that the design feature that would compensate for the reduction of windows would serve the same purpose as the windows would otherwise have done. So the question then becomes is what are windows there for? And in a nutshell, it's to activate the street, to make it an active space, so that you're not walking past 100-foot blank building wall. In the case of that Publix, they did what I think is just a wonderful outdoor seating area. And they also did some really interesting raised planters the entire length of their facade. So it creates activity, it creates, sort of life and motion, and takes the place of what the windows had previously done. So we did do our best to match up the compensation to the thing that was changing. If you think that we could have done better, or maybe missed the boat on something, or maybe forgot to include something that should be there, truly, we are all ears and we would love to hear from you.
And one more thing I'll add on that is to keep in mind and to look at for your consideration is we definitely set some what I consider pretty limited ranges with which they can change those things can be changed basically. So the sidewalk width is 1 foot or 2 foot. The setbacks it's 1 foot up to 5. So it's not a total change in the site layout, where you're going from an urban to a suburban layout. And then with the transparency, it's a reduction of up to 30%, whereas a commercial building, a typical commercial building in the multimodal transportation district is required to have a 60% transparency. So you'd be looking at is the maximum reduction with the compensating enhancements provided would be a commercial building have a 30% transparency along the front.
I'd like to zig for just a moment.
Okay.
I was a landscape architect before I retired, and I would like to speak for the trees. I don't know what newly planted street trees in Tallahassee look like and their survival rate, but if part of this is not ensuring a happy life for the trees, it ought to be. And if moving it to the back of the sidewalk, make sure it's got plenty of room between the back of the sidewalk and the building face. And the other thing is the soil at the back of a curb is not necessarily a nice place for a tree to be. And the developer ought to be responsible for correcting that before they stick a tree in and expect it to live. I lived in Los Angeles. Everything was bad there, so they had to replace the soil with something where the tree would grow. And I haven't studied newly planted street trees in Tallahassee, so I don't know the survival rate. And that's it. I'm done.
Okay. Thank you. Randy, I see your hand.
Okay, well, I wanted to go back a little bit and review the history of how we got here. It started because a lot of people were concerned about Gaines Street and the deviation ordinance. Because Gaines Street, it turned out after we made a public record request, we found out that even though there was a zoning code, not a single building, not one, was built according to the code. Every single one got deviations, and deviations had to do with setbacks and landscaping and height. There wasn't a single thing that met the height restrictions, not one. So we were concerned about this, and we felt like we have to have some predictability in our zoning codes, because otherwise you're never going to know what you're going to get. And some people love Gain Street. I have mixed feelings about it. Parts of it I like, but the height is disturbing to me. It ended up being canyon-like. Maybe other people disagree with me, but I'm president of the Lafayette Park Association, and our neighborhood urban area is Midtown. I can tell you that it is almost unanimous among our members that they don't want it to be high-rise, and they don't want it to be college town. And the part of this new ordinance that concerns me the most is this: if you save a tree, you get 2 extra floors. Now, I know, Billy, you assured me this wouldn't happen next to a residence, but I mean, that's good as far as it goes. I'm not scoffing that that's important, but it's Midtown I'm concerned about, not what's next to the house, the residential area that's adjacent. Midtown is the area that we go to when we want to dine, when we want to hear music, when we want to buy some clothes. It's people go there on foot. It's our neighborhood, urban area, and we don't want it high rise. So this 2 extra floor thing is kind of disturbing because it's already in the multimodal district where they can go pretty darn high as it is. So we don't want it to be downtown. We have a downtown where we have high rises, and that's not what we want for Midtown. This is very concerning. I also want to say that you talk about the city planners having more flexibility, but I think that this ordinance you've written gives you far less flexibility, because under the old deviation ordinance, you had criteria that you could apply to decide whether or not you were going to grant the deviation. And I think the deviations were granted far too liberally, but at least you still had some control over it, and you could say yes or no. But under this, the deviations are automatic. And so you have lost all control over it. If a developer comes in and they say, well, I'm going to do A, B, and C, and the code says I can do that, even if you think it's a terrible idea in this particular site, you've lost control of it. You can't do anything about it anymore.
Randy, I think what I would do is challenge you to firstly, this isn't providing deviations. It's providing different ways of approaching the desired outcome. Most of the actually all of the compensating enhancements are really directed towards the pedestrian space. I'm really struggling to see how this would result in us losing control, given how precise and limited and surgical it is. Again, as an example, the sidewalks would only be allowed to be reduced by 2 feet. That's generally the difference of an 8-foot sidewalk versus a 10-foot sidewalk, but the public space would still remain the same because the planting area would have to be increased.
Some of the things would make very little difference to people like people in my homeowners association. For instance, I'll give you an example. If they're allowed to have extra floors, one of the things they have to do to compensate for the extra is one of the things is recess the upper floors. So I gather that's to give it a little bit more architectural interest or something. But honestly, that doesn't make much difference to somebody who doesn't want to see high rises. I mean, the fact that the upper floors are a little recessed, big deal.
Well,
it's going to cast the same shadow.
What would be really helpful to us is if since you're the representative of I think it's the Lafayette Park HOA, if you guys could gather your thoughts in writing, we're going to take those very seriously. Again, I mean, a core value for all of us is we're here as your planning staff to generate ideas. Neither John or I have an agenda that we're trying to force. I really mean that. I hope you believe me when I say that.
And I don't want you to think that I'm being critical of you. I absolutely appreciate that you give us these forums and that you do listen so well and that we can feel free to come to you with our ideas. but there is such a basic difference here in terms of philosophy of zoning, and I'm not quite sure how to bridge that, because this is more than just a matter of tweaking a few things. I mean, I could tell you the things I hate the most. I already told you I can't stand the idea of saying if you save a tree, you can go up 2 floors. But this is not a tweaking thing. This is a real, just overall philosophical difference of opinion on how to approach zoning.
Well, let's talk about the tree issue for a second, if we could, because I'm not sure if everybody, and maybe I'm wrong, but in 60 seconds or less, the tree ordinance right now, generally speaking, will allow an applicant to remove a tree, with some exceptions, if they mitigate. And what does mitigation mean? If the tree is taken down, they're assessed a certain number of debits, which is based on the size of that tree, and then they're required to do replantings. The tree ordinance has been in effect, 20 years maybe, I'm guessing. All that we're trying to do with that extra height option is within the regulatory framework that's in place now, we're trying to incentivize the protection of trees.
Well, Bill, let me ask you this, because I think we're on the same page with the trees. Would you work with me on a better tree ordinance?
Actually, what I would invite you to do is to work with the city's urban forester, Mindy Moorman, who's the lead on all things trees.
All right.
She's the city's urban forester. She did the urban forest master plan, and she would be the point person for anything related to trees.
But I don't think she's the one who would be in a position to put new legislation before the commission, would she?
She's a staff member just as I am.
Yeah, I think she actually would, Randy. I think she certainly are the lead opinion for everything we do involving trees. So,
And Mindy has worked in a couple of different cities as an urban forester, and she's extraordinarily knowledgeable. She knows far more about trees than we do.
Because I think you and I are in total agreement that the way that the tree ordinance works now, it's not protecting anything.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that, but what I think I am saying is what I am saying is that within the bounds of the tree ordinance, we're trying to create ways of incentivizing the protection of trees. There's a larger policy question that's much bigger than what we're working on right now, about tree preservation. But just within the code as it exists today for the tree ordinance, we're trying to do our best to create incentives. Now, I think it's perfectly reasonable, and I'm just throwing an idea out here. Again, this is in the spirit of us being idea generators. Not telling anyone what they should think. If the community, let's say for example, likes the idea, and this is just a what if. Maybe you like the idea of trying to save larger trees, but where in limited circumstances a developer might be allowed to have an extra floor, but maybe you don't want that to happen in Midtown. There's nothing that says that this ordinance couldn't address certain sections of the city where maybe the consensus among our stakeholders is that, gosh, we get where you're going, staff, but in this one particular area, we really just can't wrap our arms around that. So,
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think it would be possible to say that within certain districts, say the MMTDs or, well, Midtown is an MMTD, but that certain trees will be protected and carve out an exception from the rest of the tree ordinance, and maybe attack it that way?
I think that is getting into Chapter 5, which is the Environmental Management Ordinance. And just because, what we're trying to work on is Chapters 9 and 10. Chapter 5 is something that we've just made the call for the purposes of this project to not make any changes to. That's mostly in the spirit of, wanting to manage the scope of this effort so that we can try to get something accomplished. Chapter 5 gets into a ton of different things like grading and stormwater, in addition to tree protection. And that, if that were to be opened up, it would significantly slow this project down.
Well, the city's talking about trying to be carbon neutral by 20, 50 is now their goal. But, I'd love to see them do something, and this is probably off topic a little bit, but every one of these new projects has a carbon footprint. I would love to see that carbon footprint calculated and the developer told when you're done, have to do enough offsets that it's carbon neutral. You're not adding anything. And there's a lot of things that can be done these days. There's new kinds of concrete that can be used. There's tree planting. There's all kinds of energy saving things. And, I don't know when we're ever going to do that, but I'd love to see us start doing that. So that's
Okay.
another thing to throw out there.
Okay, doke. Well, you as an HOA president, we would really be grateful for any written comments that might come from your neighborhood, and that goes for everyone. If anyone would, I'm going to go back and listen to the video of this meeting after we finish, and take copious notes. But if anyone, either as an individual or through your HOA, would like to provide further comments, we would really be grateful for that.
Okay, I'm sure ATN will do something as well, and I'll talk to my board. We're meeting on the 20th. Bill, I want you to know we love you and we appreciate you. And I know that your hands are sometimes tied and you can't have the world exactly the way you want it. But anyway, thank you for hearing us out.
Well, you're very welcome. But I appreciate that. But believe me when I say that the flexibility that you're seeing in the glitch ordinance, it's something that I've seen work really well in other cities. It's not for me to decide what's right for Tallahassee, but I do believe, in my opinion as a city planner, I think one of the shortcomings of our current code is that in some select areas, it takes a really unnecessarily rigid one-size-fits-all approach. And that's really all that we're trying to do. I think we've kind of made a surgical attempt to go in and make some tweaks to move away from that one-size-fits-all approach. Doesn't mean that we've lost predictability. It absolutely doesn't mean that we've taken our eye off the ball. If anything, I think we've thought even more deeply about it because we're acknowledging that, say, for example, I'll go back to the pedestrian environment. It's the mix of all of those standards working together that counts. So I'll shush again. Do we have any other comments?
Again, please feel free to follow up with us in writing or anything. Yes, ma'am.
We'll put more in writing then.
Yeah,
Marcia.
my name is Marcia Turner, and I'm president of the Old Town Neighborhood Association. And I look forward to putting together some notes in coordination with Randy and ATN. So you will be getting some feedback from our neighborhood and our
Okay.
perspective.
Well, we will look forward to it. And and I'll make this open invitation to anyone. If you would like to just, get on the phone some afternoon and talk through, what the code is trying to do, why it says something, please call John or I. We'd love to have the chance to talk through some of these things. You know, I think there is a chance to do some good here. I really believe that. I think bad things happen when zoning codes are overly rigid, and I think from a design standpoint, we can do some good here. So I really am hoping that we can have an ongoing dialogue with each other. John and I are never going to come at this where, we kind of have our agenda and try to force something through. That is not at all what we're about. If we do our job well as planners, we should be generating ideas and bringing them to a community forum where they can be discussed and debated. But, thank you for allowing me to sort of challenge folks on a couple of points that I thought were just factually wrong. But let's keep talking. Let's keep talking and thinking about these issues. And this is a starting point. So I don't want anyone to think that anything is etched in marble and there's just one version of this. If you worked with us on the neighborhood compatibility ordinance, you know that went through several iterations before it kind of reached its final version. And, I would imagine something really similar happening here. So, we, we're really eager to both get this verbal feedback, but also written comments as well, if you have the time.
Thank you so much. Oh, and off topic, I sent a written complaint to permitting. I know that's not exactly your area, but they are gouging the heck out of the root zones of the trees along Adams Street on that large project that's between Monroe and Adams and Carolina. You know the one I'm talking about?
I do, yeah, I know that, Randy.
And I sent in a written complaint, and I never heard back from anybody. If you could follow up on that with whoever.
Sure. Randy, can you give me a little more detail on who you sent that to, or what, where that was directed?
I went online and it said submit your comments. It was sent to permitting, so I don't know.
Understood.
But I was horrified to see that within literally 2 feet of the root of the tree, not the roots, 2 feet of the tree, they were gouging the heck out of the roots, and it was all along Adams Street.
Adams, yeah. Though I'm sorry to hear you say that, but I'm glad that you're reporting it. I know that's been the trees in that project are a high priority with the approval of it.
That's that Governor's Row thing they wanted to
do.
So it helped to have all the trees die. But anyway, that's off topic. I just want to know if you could maybe make sure.
Sure, I'll follow up on that for you and get a response to you.
Appreciate it. All right. Well, I'm going to say good night.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. We're grateful for your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Good night.